The internet has always been a little weird, but back in the 90s, it was a lawless wasteland where you could get a Game Boy, a haunted doll, and, if you knew where to look, something a whole lot worse. And in the middle of all that chaos was Sharon Lopatka, a woman who wasn't just browsing the darkest corners of the web, she was actively shopping. Sharon didn't want just anything. She had one very specific, very disturbing request. And while most people took one look and backed away immediately, one man did not. Enter Bobby Glass, a government employee, a father, and, as it turns out, the worst possible person to say yes. What happened next? Well, I can tell you that when the police showed up at Bobby's trailer, they weren't there to chat about dial-up speeds. But before we dive into this story, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit follow now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10-Minute Murder. Let's get into it. There was a time, not too long ago, when the internet was a mysterious and futuristic concept, like flying cars or robot butlers that actually worked. Most people hadn't even logged on, let alone wrap their heads around the fact that tucked inside anonymous chat rooms, an entire underworld was brewing. Information had never been so easy to access, so free, so unregulated. So if you wanted to talk to strangers across the world, it was just a few keystrokes away. But here's the thing. When you give people unlimited access to one another, you don't just get polite discussions about book clubs or casserole recipes. You also get the kinds of conversations that make you stop mid-scroll and ask yourself, what in the Kentucky Fried Hell am I reading? Because just as the internet opened the floodgates for everyday conveniences, shopping, entertainment, and whatever the early version of memes were, it also became a marketplace for things far darker than off-brand Tupperware. This was the 90s. The internet was growing faster than anyone could regulate, and beneath its shiny, wow, look, we can email each other exterior, there was a demand for things that most people didn't even want to imagine. Some of it was harmless. Video games, collectible figurines, weirdly specific Beanie Babies, resale markets. But some of it was deeply, profoundly disturbing. And stepping into this uncharted digital territory, both as a seller and a seeker, was 35-year-old Sharon Lopatka, a woman with some very particular demands of her own. Sharon Denberg was born in 1961, the oldest of 4 daughters in a strictly Orthodox Jewish family. And from the outside looking in, she checked every single box of a textbook good girl. She was active in her Baltimore synagogue, which wasn't surprising considering her father was a cantor at the largest Orthodox Jewish congregation in the city. Whether Sharon was genuinely devout or just following the script laid out for her is up for debate, but either way, she played the role. At school, she was extremely well-behaved and thriving. She got good grades, sang in the choir, and joined multiple sports teams. She had plenty of friends, and by all appearances, she was as normal could be. But here's the thing about normal. It doesn't always fit everyone, and for Sharon, it chafed like an itchy sweater that she couldn't take off. The rigid expectations, the structured life, it wasn't enough. But breaking free as a straight-A, well-mannered teenager in a religious household, not happening. Adulthood, though, that was another story. And once Sharon found her way out, there was no turning back. Sharon Denberg found her escape hatch in the form of Victor Lopatka, a slightly older, mild-mannered construction worker she met after high school. He was reliable, steady, and sweet enough. But the real selling point? He was Catholic. Marrying outside the faith was the equivalent of lighting a match and tossing it over her shoulder as she walked away from her Orthodox upbringing. Her parents were predictably horrified, but Sharon had made up her mind. She and Victor packed up and moved to Hampstead, Maryland, putting even more distance between her and the life that she no longer wanted. While Victor stuck to his construction work, Sharon built something of her own. With no kids to occupy her time, she became a full-fledged entrepreneur, tapping into the gold rush of the early internet. She started an online advertising business, writing marketing materials and mailing them out. She also ran psychic and horoscope websites, collecting a cut from the hotline numbers she plastered across her growing network of pages. And business was booming. The internet wasn't just growing, it was exploding. Every day, more people logged on, and where there were people, there was demand. Some of it was innocent enough. Shopping, self-help, those sketchy weight loss ads that promised miracles. But then there was the darker side. And Sharon, she was happy to cater to that market too. Under the alias Nancy Carlson, she started selling pornographic images and videos featuring women being abused. According to Sharon's own descriptions, some of the women were willing participants, women who liked being drugged or knocked out before sex. Others, she claimed, had no idea what was happening to them. And here's where things took an even sharper turn. Selling content to an increasingly depraved audience seemed to awaken something in Sharon, something she was ready to act on. She started small, selling her own used underwear to strangers online. But that wasn't enough. She wanted more. She started frequenting chat rooms, making posts that left no room for misinterpretation. Sharon was a masochist, and she wasn't shy about it. She wanted to be tortured, strangled, and used during sex. And she wasn't looking for role play. She wanted the real thing. Her ultimate fantasy, she wrote, was to be strangled to death while having sex. Most people obviously recoiled. Some tried to talk her out of it, but Sharon wasn't interested in debates, interventions, or moral objections. She wasn't looking for someone to tell her that she needed help. She was looking for someone who would say yes. Sharon's online posts were the kind of posts that you stop and think, okay, but you're joking, right? Spoiler, she wasn't. Some members of the online community tried to intervene, urging her to seek help, to reconsider, to, at the very least, not go through with what she was openly plotting. Sharon didn't want their concern. She wanted commitment. Quote, "I want the real thing," she shot back at anyone who tried to talk her out of it. "I did not ask for you preaching at me." Most people backed away immediately, but one man did not. His name was Bobby Frederick Glass, and if the internet had become a breeding ground for deviant behavior, he was already deep in the swamp. On paper, Bobby Glass seemed like a decent guy, 45-year-old computer analyst at the Catawba County government in North Carolina. He had spent over 16 years in his job without raising a single red flag. His father had been a well-respected government figure with a problematic antebellum mansion to prove it. Bobby, however, was not his father. He was a walking contradiction, married for 14 years, a father of 3, living with his family in a trailer tucked away in the woods. But instead of spending his evenings with his wife and kids, Bobby was glued to his computer, lost in a digital world his wife, Sherry, had no part in. Until, of course, she decided to look in for herself. One night, fed up with the secrecy, Sherry went through Bobby's emails. What she found wasn't just disturbing, it was enough to make her pack up her kids and leave. The messages detailed his fantasies of sexual violence in stomach-churning detail. Bobby had lost his family, but online, he had just found his perfect match. Sharon and Bobby met in a chat room, and for the first time, she had someone who wasn't just humoring her, he was in. Quote, "If you put all their messages together," said Captain Danny Barlow of the Caldwell County Sheriff's Department, "you would have a very large novel." Not just a novel, a 900-page-long blueprint of what they were going to do. For months, they'd planned every detail. And in October 1996, Sharon put that plan into motion, leaving Maryland to meet Bobby in Georgia. Before she left Victor a note. Quote, "If my body is never retrieved, don't worry. Know that I am at peace." That's not the kind of thing you want to find on a post-it from your wife. She also urged him not to go after Bobby if anything happened to her. That was an immediate no from Victor, who marched straight to the police with the letter. Investigators traced Sharon's digital footprint to Bobby's trailer in North Carolina. They watched him for days, hoping to see any sign that Sharon was alive. When nothing surfaced, a judge issued a search warrant. Inside, the place was an absolute disaster. Rotting trash, abandoned children's toys, filth everywhere. But worse than the mess were the things that shouldn't have been there. Sharon's belongings. And then, outside, a shallow grave. Bobby Glass confessed almost immediately. He said Sharon had stayed with him for 3 days, indulging in their darkest fantasies, before things took a turn. Quote, "I don't know how much I pulled the rope," he told investigators. "I never wanted to kill her, but she ended up dead." The autopsy told a different story. Sharon had been strangled multiple times over a period of time. The coroner ruled her death an accident, but investigators were not buying it. They had 900 pages of proof that Bobby had absolutely intended to kill her. He was charged with first-degree murder but cut a deal, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and sexual exploitation. His sentence? A whopping 36 to 53 months. But there was one last twist. When investigators combed through his computer, they found a massive stash of child pornography. That got him another 27 months in federal prison, to begin after his state sentence was up. Not that he ever served it. In 2000, just a month before his federal time was set to begin, Bobby Glass died of a heart attack. One final plot twist, and this twisted chapter was closed for good. Thanks for listening to 10-Minute Murder. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps more true crime fans find the show. And if you're into mysteries, something with a little less murder, you can check out my other podcast, 10-Minute Mystery. Same brief and bingeable vibe as this one, just with more mystery. You can find everything at 10minutemurder.com. I'm Joe, the host, and I'll see you next time.